Imagine being offered the absolute ultimate executive benefits package.
Oh, like the dream setup?
Exactly. You're handed unlimited expenses, a guaranteed living wage, the ability to take your spouse on all expenses paid international travel, and, absolute authority in your field.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Right. But now, imagine taking that ironclad contract, proving to everyone in the boardroom that you completely legally earned it, and then intentionally tossing it straight into the incinerator.
This is burning it.
Yeah. Why on earth would someone do that? Well, welcome to the deep dive. May the divine bless your day and your entire week as we embark on today's journey of discovery together.
It's going to be a good one today.
It really is. We have a profoundly interesting exploration ahead of us. We're digging into some study notes from the Holman and NAA study Bibles, and our focus is a really specific ancient letter 1 Corinthians chapter 9.
Written by the Apostle Paul, of course.
Right. And for you listening, you really do not need a theology degree to see yourself in this text. I mean, today's mission is basically to explore a masterclass in psychology and leadership.
Yeah, it's about that intense tension between having the absolute right to something and making this strategic, voluntary choice to just give that right up for a greater purpose.
Which is so countercultural, but before we get into the sacrifice part, we should probably set the stage. The dynamics at play in this letter go way beyond just being a historical religious document, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Paul is dissecting human behavior here. He's looking at motivation. And this whole concept of personal entitlement, you have to remember his audience. He's speaking to Corinth.
Right, what kind of city was that?
It was bustling, wealthy, and incredibly status-obsessed. It was a major Greek city.
Yeah.
So to reach them, he uses this fascinating rhetorical strategy. He doesn't just casually open his letter by mentioning, oh, hey, by the way, I gave up all my worldly comforts.
Like a humble brag.
Right. No humble brags here. Instead, he spends a huge amount of time aggressively litigating his case. He proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he had every right to demand compensation in the first place.
Because, I guess, you can't voluntarily surrender something you don't rightfully possess.
Exactly. You have to own it to give it away.
So let's look at the undeniable proof and all the perks he lists, because Paul really comes out swinging. He defends his status, establishing firmly that he is a free man and he's a true apostle because he has literally seen Jesus.
But he knows that just claiming that personally isn't enough for the Corinthians.
Well, they need receipts.
Yeah. So he turns the mirror back on them and says they are the seal of his apostleship.
The seal. Which, in the modern world, we think of like a sticker on a diploma, but back then it was a bigger deal, right?
A massive deal. The study notes provide some great historical context here. To understand the weight of that word seal, you have to put yourself in the ancient Near East. Picture a bustling Mediterranean port.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
A merchant is shipping a clay jar of incredibly expensive, rare wine. Now, before that jar ever goes on a ship, the merchant takes hot wax, drips it over the lid, and presses his heavy signet ring right into it.
Ah, like a tamper-proof lock.
Exactly. That seal is the ultimate mark of authenticity and origin. If that seal is intact when it arrives, the buyer knows the product is 100% legitimate.
So Paul is basically telling the Corinthians that their community, like their very existence, is his wax seal.
Yes. They're the living, breathing guarantee that his work is entirely legitimate.
Wow. Okay. So he establishes his credentials with that seal analogy, and then he immediately pivots to the rights that come attached to it. And I was reading this, and it honestly reads like a first-century human resources manual.
It really does. He lays out the whole compensation package.
Right. He argues he has the absolute right to eat and drink at their expense, the right to be fully financially supported, and even the right to take a believing wife along on his travel journeys.
All expenses paid.
Yeah. And he explicitly points out the industry standard, noting that other apostles, the Lord's brothers and Cephas or Peter, they are all actively utilizing these exact benefits.
He's saying, look at my peers, they're getting paid.
Yeah.
And he grounds this defense in the everyday logic of the working world, too. He asks these 3 rapid-fire questions that any tradesman or laborer in Corinth would completely understand.
What are the questions?
Well, he asks what soldier goes to war and pays for his own armor and rations.
Right, none of them.
Right. And what farmer breaks his back planting a vineyard and refuses to eat a single grape? Or what shepherd spends his life tending a flock but never drinks the milk?
So it's just the most fundamental principle of fair labor. A worker deserves the fruits of their labor.
Exactly.
And he takes it a step further, too. He brings in the law of Moses to back up this practical logic.
Yeah.
He references that ancient agricultural rule, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain.
Such a great visual.
It is, because if you have an enormous animal dragging this heavy threshing sledge over wheat all day, it's just cruel to tie its mouth shut so it can't eat the grain. It's literally processing.
Yeah, let the ox eat.
Right. And he clarifies that God didn't put that in the sacred text just because he's super concerned about farm animals. I mean, it was a broader ethical blueprint meant for humans.
To show that a worker deserves to share in the harvest.
Exactly. He even mentions temple workers who get to take home a portion of the altar offerings.
The layering of his argument here is just masterful. I mean, he uses cultural norms, practical daily agricultural life, and sacred law to build this completely airtight, undeniable case for his right to a paycheck.
Nobody reading that letter could walk away thinking Paul was just some amateur or an unpaid intern.
Not a chance.
But, okay, let's unpack this for a second, because that brings up a glaring strategic question. Paul is pointing to standard labor practices, essentially corporate expense accounts and fair wage laws, to prove he's completely entitled to compensation. So, why exhaust so much time and political capital building this elaborate, bulletproof legal case for rights he has absolutely zero intention of using?
It's a great question. And it comes down to leverage and perception.
Okay, how so?
Well, Paul is establishing his inherent value so that his subsequent sacrifice isn't misinterpreted. He doesn't want it seen as weakness or illegitimacy.
Oh, I see.
Because imagine if he just showed up in Corinth, which again was a city that really respected wealth and bold speech, and he just quietly worked for free without ever defending his status.
His critics would probably tear him apart.
Instantly. They'd pounce. They would say, oh, he doesn't charge because his teachings are worthless, or he isn't a real apostle like Peter, so he can't demand a fee.
So by legally and culturally proving his right to demand payment, he transforms his refusal of that payment from a sign of inferiority into a strategic, voluntary exertion of power.
Perfectly said. It's a power move, honestly.
Which makes the actual twist in the letter so much more impactful.
Yeah.
After this massive, undeniable buildup of his rights, he just drops them.
Just walks away from the whole package.
He writes that he would rather die than use these rights and lose his reason to boast.
And the motivation behind that refusal introduces this really profound Greek concept that the study notes highlight. The word is oikonomia.
Oikonomia, which usually gets translated as what? Stewardship.
Yeah, stewardship or dispensation. But we really need to look at the mechanics of what that meant in the ancient world to grasp what Paul is feeling here. Think of an oikonomos as the chief estate manager for a remarkably wealthy king.
Okay.
This manager holds the keys to the vault. He handles the gold. He distributes the food to the household. But, and this is the crucial detail, the wealth isn't his.
He didn't earn it.
Right, and he doesn't own it. If he fails to distribute the master's wealth, he will face severe punishment. And Paul views his preaching of the gospel exactly like this.
So it's not a career path he just opted into.
No, not at all. It is a heavy, inescapable responsibility that was entrusted to him. He literally writes, "Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel."
He's basically saying the job chose him, he didn't choose the job.
Exactly. And the burden is heavy. Because this mission is a strict, undeniable obligation, he feels he can't claim a traditional reward just for doing what he's commanded to do under threat of judgment.
That makes sense.
So he flips the concept of a reward upside down. His true reward is the ability to offer the gospel completely free of charge. By refusing any financial support from the Corinthians, he ensures he places zero financial obstacles in the path of the message.
He's just the delivery guy, handing out the king's wealth.
Exactly that.
Okay, but if you look at this through a modern organizational lens, I see a potential problem here.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Christ commanded that workers deserve their wages, and Paul just spent a whole chapter proving that, isn't Paul technically breaking the rules by working for free?
Well,
I mean, it reminds me of a startup CEO who makes a big show of refusing a salary, right? They take like $1 a year. And sure, it looks incredibly noble for the CEO, but it puts immense, invisible pressure on the vice presidents and the managers who actually need their paychecks to pay their mortgages.
that's a really sharp analogy.
Doesn't Paul's super volunteer status make the other apostles, like Peter, look greedy by comparison?
That is the exact tension a lot of scholars point out. But the study notes are very clear here. Paul is not issuing a universal mandate that every spiritual leader must work for free. He fully supports the right of others to be paid.
So why wanted the double standard for himself?
His decision is a highly localized, tactical choice based on the specific culture of Corinth. See, the Greco-Roman world was full of these wandering philosophers, sophists, and cynics.
Okay.
They would travel from city to city, deliver these very impressive speeches, fleece wealthy patrons for exorbitant fees, and then just disappear.
Ah, ancient grifters.
Totally. And Corinth was a very lucrative market for those types of guys. Paul is desperate to distinguish himself from them.
Okay, that makes total sense. So taking money in that specific city would have immediately lumped him in with the scam artists?
Exactly. For Paul, in this context, demanding his rights would have created massive cultural friction. He isn't throwing Peter under the bus at all. He's just recognizing that his specific audience requires a different approach. He prioritizes maximum impact over his own personal comfort.
Wow. And giving up the money was really just the physical, financial layer of his sacrifice, which honestly seems like the easy part when you keep reading.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because financial comfort is nothing compared to cultural identity. The text shows that Paul didn't just empty his wallet, he systematically emptied his social comfort zones too.
It is the ultimate exercise in empathy and adaptation. Because despite being a free man with significant status, Paul writes that he voluntarily made himself a slave to everyone just to win over as many people as possible.
And the text outlines his adaptability beautifully. To the Jews, he became like a Jew, and the study notes mention he even went so far as to have his young companion, Timothy, circumcised in another biblical account.
Which is an incredibly painful, extreme step.
Yeah, just to avoid putting up unnecessary cultural barriers when they traveled into Jewish communities. And then, to those under the law, he lived as under the law. But then, to those without the law, meaning the Gentiles, he lived as one without the law.
Now, the notes do clarify a really vital theological distinction there. When he says he lived as one without the law to reach the Roman and Greek Gentiles, he wasn't suddenly becoming morally lawless toward God.
Right. He wasn't just throwing all morals out the window.
Exactly. He was operating under what he calls the law of Christ, which refers to the ethical and moral teachings of love and sacrifice taught by Jesus, rather than the strict ceremonial, dietary, and cultural rules of the old Mosaic law.
Got it. And finally, to the weak. He became weak. But, if you are listening to this and wondering how this applies to your own career or life, think about the modern concept of extreme code switching.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Right, like you fly to a corporate headquarters in Tokyo, you bow, you hand over your business card with 2 hands, and you observe strict hierarchy. But then the next day you fly to a tech startup in Silicon Valley, you throw on a hoodie, grab a ping pong paddle, and use first names with the founders.
You blend in.
But there is a line, isn't there, between being highly adaptable to your audience and just being a total chameleon who stands for nothing. I mean, if you constantly shift to match whoever's in front of you, don't you lose your own authenticity?
That is the natural conclusion most people draw. It feels like you're being fake.
Yeah.
But the insight here is that Paul's adaptation is not about pandering.
How is it different?
Well, pandering is when you put on a fake mask to get people to like you, usually for self-preservation or profit, right?
Right.
Paul's doing the opposite. It's self-erasure. We all have preferences, traditions, and cultural bubbles that make us feel safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
Paul is taking his own cultural armor, his Jewish heritage, his preferences, and tossing them aside.
He's absorbing the shock.
Exactly. He is absorbing all the psychological discomfort of change, so his audience doesn't have to. He removes the cultural friction so that the core message of the gospel is the absolute only thing his audience has to grapple with.
Yeah.
They don't have to adopt his culture to hear his truth.
He is deliberately getting out of his own way, which honestly sounds psychologically exhausting.
It'd have to be.
Refusing a steady income, constantly changing your cultural habits, endlessly adjusting to the needs and sensitivities of completely different demographics, that is a recipe for severe burnout. How does a person sustain that level of extreme self-denial?
He sustains it through intense, focused discipline. And he actually explains this to the Corinthians using a metaphor that would hit them right in the chest.
Elite athletics.
Elite athletic.
The study notes provide some amazing historical context here regarding the Isthmian Games. Corinth was actually the host city for these massive athletic competitions, held every 2 years in honor of the sea god Poseidon.
So the people reading this letter were completely surrounded by sports culture.
Yeah. The athletes, the stadiums, the training, it was woven into the fabric of their daily lives.
And Paul leans directly into that shared cultural obsession. He compares the Christian life to running a foot race in a massive stadium or stepping into a brutal boxing match.
He really knew his audience.
He did. He points out that elite athletes exercise staggering amounts of self-control. The historical record tells us these competitors would undergo 10 months of strict, specialized diets, abstaining from wine and certain foods, enduring punishing daily regimens.
Just brutal training.
And why did they put their bodies through such misery? The text says they do it to win a perishable crown.
And the notes highlight how literal that was. The victors at the Isthmian Games weren't handed solid gold medals.
Right. No Olympic gold here.
No. They were crowned with wreaths made of withered celery.
Which is wild to think about.
Or sometimes pine branches. They were starving themselves and bleeding in the dirt for a plant that would literally turn to dust on their mantelpiece a few weeks later.
It really highlights the absurdity of human ambition when it's disconnected from an eternal purpose. Paul is using an argument from the lesser to the greater here.
Meaning?
If a Greek athlete will endure 10 months of torture and strictly deny their bodily desires just to win a rotting pine branch, how much more discipline, focus, and self-denial should a Christian exercise for an imperishable crown?
Wow. Yeah, he writes that he doesn't run aimlessly and he doesn't box like a fighter who is just blindly beating the air. Every single move, every sacrifice has a distinct purpose. Instead, he strictly disciplines his body.
And the translation there is surprisingly intense. He says he reduces it to slavery.
That's intense.
He makes his physical body and his natural desires a slave to his overarching mission.
Which perfectly mirrors his earlier statement about voluntarily becoming a slave to everyone.
Exactly. His private physical and mental discipline is the engine that actually allows his public, cultural, and financial sacrifices to happen.
You cannot give up your rights in public if you haven't mastered your desires in private.
Spot on.
But, you know, the text also notes that Paul disciplines his body so that after preaching to others, he himself won't be disqualified in the end. And the study notes highlight a very specific word here for disqualified, one that implies failing a rigorous test.
Yes.
And this often triggers a massive debate among readers. People wonder, is Paul, arguably the greatest missionary in history, genuinely terrified that God will revoke his salvation if he slips up?
It's a common question, but the study notes definitively put that concern to rest.
Okay, so what does it mean?
The word translated as disqualified must be read within the tight context of the athletic metaphor he's using. In the ancient games, being disqualified didn't mean you were stripped of your citizenship or executed. It meant you stepped out of your lane or you broke a rule of the contest.
So you are still an athlete in the stadium, but you lose the prize and you are basically benched for the rest of the event.
Exactly. Paul is terrified of losing his effectiveness. He's deeply concerned with being sidelined from the specific mission he was entrusted with. It's a fear of losing his impact, not his soul.
That changes the whole tone of it.
Right. His relentless discipline is about staying in the race so he can continue to be a useful vessel for the message, rather than becoming a cautionary tale of someone who preached well but lived poorly.
If you're listening to this and wondering how this applies to your own daily life, just look at the remarkable progression we've tracked today.
It's a real journey.
We watched Paul fiercely claim his rights, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he deserves compensation and respect. Then we watched him voluntarily lay those exact rights down, refusing a paycheck to keep the path totally clear for his message.
And then the cultural side.
Yeah, we saw him systematically strip away his own cultural ego, adapting to whoever was in front of him to build a bridge rather than a wall. And finally, we explored the brutal athlete-level discipline required to actually pull all of this off without losing focus.
It serves as a brilliant, challenging blueprint for a purpose-driven life. It really flips the modern script of entitlement completely upside down.
It really does, because we are so heavily conditioned by our culture to demand what we are owed, right? To aggressively defend our boundaries and to insist on our personal comfort.
Absolutely.
But Paul challenges us to look in the mirror and ask a very difficult question. Is what I'm owed actually getting in the way of what I am meant to do? Where might insisting on my rights be the very thing holding me back from a much greater purpose?
That is a profound question.
Yeah.
And if we pull one final thread from the sources to leave you, the listener, pondering, it's the sheer radical nature of his language.
The slave language.
Yes. The text heavily emphasizes that Paul was a free man who actively, intentionally chose to become a slave to everyone.
Which was a big deal back then.
Huge. In the ancient Roman world, status, honor, and upward mobility were everything. The entire society was structured around climbing that ladder and distancing yourself from the lower classes.
Right.
Voluntarily descending that ladder, willingly giving up your hard-earned status to serve someone beneath you, it was completely unthinkable to the Roman mind. It was socially revolting.
It would have shattered their entire worldview of power and success.
It absolutely did. And it forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about our own lives today. I mean, we may not have Roman social classes, but we have our own ladders.
We definitely do.
So what modern status symbols? Our impressive job titles, our insistence on being right in an argument, our cultural superiority. What are we too afraid to let go of to truly connect with the people around us?
That is definitely something to chew on this week. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive as you head out into the world. May God bless all of you listeners. See you next time.